All right. Welcome to the Center for Diversity Leadership, where we are supporting school leaders together across the nation as they create school cultures that ensure all students are seen, valued, celebrated, and heard. I am Xavier Reed,
And I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter.
and we are your NAESP fellows in this work. All right, this is our second episode that we have recorded, or that we're recording this year. And for this episode, we actually have a special guest with us today. Miss Trudi Lebron will be joining us today. Trudi, you want to say hello to the listeners?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today.
We're so happy that you could join us. And the topic of discussion today is going to be DEI. So diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We all know that is very important to the work that we do in our school systems. It's important work that we are seeing across a lot of different organizations and a lot of different areas of our lives right now. And so we wanted to bring in someone from the outside to be able to come and give their perspective and give us some of their knowledge as it pertains to this work. And so I think first to get us started, Trudy, can you provide us and our listeners a background of how, kind of what your journey has been and how you've gotten to this point?
Yes, I'll try to keep this really quick because it's a long history. But I grew up in the 80s in a biracial household. And in the 80s, that wasn't, like the most common thing. And so I grew up as a mixed race person. My father is Afro Latino, my mother is white. And I grew up in an urban inner city in Connecticut. And so I've always kind of grew up feeling like I didn't quite fit in anywhere. And my mom worked in a nonprofit space. And so I grew up with a very kind of close message around social justice issues. We were raised to kind of be activists and advocates for, human rights and all of that. But then what really kind of made me dedicate kind of my life to this work was that I became a teen mom. So I was mom by the time I was 15 years old. I dropped out of high school in ninth grade, and then I had a second son when I was 16 years old. So that really kind of put me into a lot of context where I was interacting with human services systems, school systems, all of the formal institutions. Very young, and this was shaping like my experience and what I understood of the world. I had the great fortune to be able to have access to quality intervention programs, often that things that we think about now in the context of equity, like human service programs that supported me in overcoming all of the things I was up against. Got my high school diploma, went to college, went into youth development work and started working in school systems. So by the time I was 19, I was managing after school programs in the same elementary school that I had went in. And I have been working with organizations ever since, really to look at the ways that our experiences in our life are shaped by the world around us and the identities that we hold. Since then, I've gotten a master's degree. I'm completing my PhD. So all of my professional experience since then has been in this work and how we improve life outcomes for people in all kinds of contexts.
That's amazing.
It really is. your rich background of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Trudy, how do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of public education?
Yes. So there's a lot of ways that people talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. I think it's really important to name that we are in a, particular social and political climate that has a very different version of what DEI means. So when I talk about DEI and the work that I have been doing, again, for like 20 years, is really about creating environments that are representative of all of us, right? Like that represent all the full scope of humanity, people of all identities, that we can create environments where people feel welcomed, where they feel like that they belong, and most importantly, where their outcomes that they are having are not being shaped by the experience that they have. So in the context of school, what we want to be thinking about, right, is are all of the students who are here, not just the students, but all of the students, all of the team members, all of the staff, all of the faculty, are people having similar experiences and are they achieving similar levels of success despite what their identities are? And when we tend to look at those things, we find that that's often not true. And the goal of DEI work is to fix those discrepancies, is to create environments where people have just as much likelihood at being successful, and just as much resources as anyone else, and that their identities are not influencing or creating those outcomes.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like to be able to find, your way through DEI work, very similar to a building principle of constantly kind of having to be like a problem solver, or so,
Mhm.
trying to find solutions. What are, as you think about like some of the solutions that you've been able to find, some successes, like what is it, are there a couple situations that come to mind, or are there, a couple strategies that have been successful for you as you've navigated that work?
Yeah, what I want to like really name first is to kind of remind all of us that diversity, equity, and inclusion, if we just think about what those words mean, diversity is about lots of difference, right?
Mhm.
Equity is about people getting the resources that they need to succeed, not that everyone gets the same thing. And inclusion, meaning that people are included, that they belong there, that there is affirmation of their identity, and that, that they can be in a space and feel welcome. When we think about those things, those are not things we do. Those are outcomes of how we do everything else,
Mhm.
right? So I think that is really the first thing, is reframing the conversation around DEI, not as these like strategies. There are strategies that lead us to diverse, equitable, and inclusive outcomes, but those are outcomes that we're striving for.
Mhm.
And the strategies that I consistently find help us get there are really these kind of, I mean, there's lots of things that can be done in terms of interventions, but there are some real basic principles just around basic humanity and how we treat people. And actually, also a lot of really basic youth development principles lead to these things. Like when we look at including young people in our decision making, and we create equity and like power sharing with everyone who is impacted by the community, for example, that's a big one. But that's, again, that is something that is just good community building principles, right? Like they're not necessarily exclusively that we do this in order to create more diversity. It's like we do this because this is good and healthy for our community.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one thing that stands out. I think a lot of the principles in education around multiple intelligences and differentiation and meeting students where they are, if we applied that to every student, we would get closer to diverse, equitable, and inclusive outcomes, right? So there are a lot of things that if we just can practice that are just these really good basic teaching principles, education principles, and youth development principles, we actually can get quite far.
Mhm.
Wow. So, Trudy, one of the biggest challenges that I see through my lens in K-12 schools um, is implementing the DEI initiatives is insufficient training, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And staff, of course, they may lack that adequate training to address those sensitive topics, such as
Yep.
bias, such as privilege,
Mhm.
systemic inequities. And to me, I think that leads to inconsistent application of those principles. What what suggestions do you have for school districts in making sure that staff are adequately trained?
Yeah, that's 100% true. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is start looking to hire professionals in teacher development, in those teacher coach roles and those administrator roles, who have a background in DEI or who have had some training in their, and this also speaks to the education pipeline that universities are, preparing teachers to be able to hold these things. because here's what's true. What's true is that, when rubber meets the road and when things get hard and when budgets get tight, DEI, well, and also with the legislation that is kind of, you know, confronting us right now, DEI is often the first thing on the chopping block, right?
Mhm.
So, and also the thing that feels like extra, right? If you feel like DEI is extra, it's always going to feel ancillary, right? Like optional. We need to start incorporating these principles into just, again, the way we do business anyway, the way we educate throughout the pipeline, right? That every class is like thinking about these things. So I think I think that is the only way to fix it is going to be to, again, make these things so that they are just how we do business and not these extra initiatives because they are at risk when they are perceived to be extra.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, I liked what I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in your previous comment, I think you essentially were saying, diversity, equity, inclusion is, not an initiative, but it's more, it's about humanity and it's about
Yeah.
being able to see that, this is necessary. These are necessary conversations. I think one of the realities that we have as principals and being a part of an organization like NAESP that represents principals from all across the country and in the world is that we have different realities
Hmm.
where we are at where we serve as principals
Yeah.
in the states that we're in, and some of us are in areas where this work and these conversations are much easier to have,
Yep.
and it's there's a push for that. But some of us are in spaces where there's a lot of resistance and there's a lot of just negative feelings, maybe that come from from what they're trying to work within.
Yeah.
What advice? What are some things that you can say to those principals that are in spaces where it's not being well received right now?
Yeah, I think that I mean that is really a tricky one. There are so many factors there, but
Yeah.
what I want to name is that no matter what school district we're talking about, and I have worked in rural school districts, in privileged school districts, everything in between. I've like done worked in different capacities, including, supporting principals with DEI initiatives, and often these things can feel like they're extra, like they're, that they're taking all this additional time and meetings and all these things, right? But no
Mhm.
matter what district you're in, there are always going to be students and families who are on the fringe, right? Who are struggling, who are marginalized for some reason, right? And that is true in the vast majority of places, right? Um, so tapping into the diversity landscape of your district and finding ways to connect with those people and to talk to those people about what their experience is and what their needs are. Like, we just have to find a different way into the conversation. Um, what I have found is that when you're able to do that, and this can take a little time, but when you're able to do that, you're able to keep people in the conversation longer, and they're able to see how their struggle and what they're experiencing is maybe a little more similar to what someone else might be experiencing that you hadn't thought about before, right? We just need to keep people in the conversation longer. And sometimes that means we as the facilitator or, the administrator, whoever is leading this work, need to think about what am I not seeing? What are the ways that people are marginalized? What are the ways that people need support? What are the ways that, people are in the margins of this community, and how can we connect with them, and how can we listen to them? And how can we bring people together? Sometimes we just have to go a little slower.
Mhm.
I will also add that I think there's something to like, we need to be willing to be in the conversation that our communities want to have, and that's not always the conversation that we want to have as the facilitator. Now, when you're in a community and you're like a family in a school, you don't want to wait for people to catch up to you. Like, and I get that totally. As a facilitator, though, like a professional practitioner, we have to think also about like what's effective. How can we try to meet the needs of everyone, and what most effective way to get there? So sometimes, we need to have a couple extra conversations, and we need to meet people where they're at.
Yeah. And Trudy,
Mm.
we've talked a lot about in-house, right? The
Hmm.
staff, the principals, the school district in itself. But
Yep.
what role do you think the collaboration with businesses and local organizations really play in advancing DEI in education?
Yeah, I think that there is tremendous opportunity for that to exist, right? I think that local businesses can be involved in all kinds of initiatives, whether we're talking mentoring, whether we're talking like developing resources, creating funding streams, creating opportunities. Um, I think there's a tremendous like potential for that. And I just want to name that I understand that that's different district to district based on like the policies that are in place and how easy collaboration is and how funding tends to get distributed. And there could be a lot that, that needs to happen. What you really need to do that is someone to really champion that work, like someone that can't be on the school principal to lead, right? That can't be on a parent to lead voluntarily like that. If What I would love to see is districts who really take to make an investment in that. And you're seeing that more and more, especially in bigger cities, like offices of community engagement and community partnership and things like that.
Okay.
I think, again, personally, I think that sometimes the bureaucracy can kind of get in the way of those initiatives, but the opportunities are absolutely there.
Exactly.
Well, we are getting to the end of our episode, but I did want to give you a moment just for any last final words that you had to say. And also, I think, you've shared with us a lot of great perspective, a lot of, hearing about your background, hearing about, your experiences, your life experiences has been really great. And I think it's helpful for us as educators. So I also wanted to give you an opportunity to share just how people can get connected with you as well.
Yeah, definitely. If people want to learn more about our work at the Institute for Equity Centered Coaching, where we train people in equity centered practice, they can follow us online. We're on our Instagram at Equity Centered Coaching. Our website is equitycenteredcoaching.com. We always have free trainings and ways to connect, and newsletter full of resources that you can just have access to. And if you're interested in learning more about me personally and my work and my history, what brings me into this, you can follow me at Trudi Lebron on Instagram, or all the platforms. It's easy to find me. TrudiLebron.
Well, we thank you so much for being able to join us today and being able to share your story. It's greatly appreciated, and we are thankful for you to be our first guest of the year.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.